Hello, fellow book readers. My name is John, and today I want to go over my March reading wrap up. March was an interesting month for me in terms of books I read. It definitely wasn't as strong a month as February was, perhaps not even as strong as January was, but it was still a good month, and I did manage to finish a lot of books that were on my TBR. I finished 20 books in March. It is my biggest month of reading of the year so far. So the first book I read in March was Starsight, which is the second book in the Skyward series by Brandon Sanderson. I gave this one 3.5 stars. I thought it was very good, but definitely a step down from the first book, Skyward. Now, why is it a step down in my opinion? Because it takes place in an entirely different setting with an entirely different cast of side characters. Our main character, Spencer, takes off to space to go chase the evil Krell. And she leaves behind the Skyward Flight crew. Now, I really like those cast of side characters, so going into space, I was a little bit worried about it. And I didn't like the new side crew as much, but they were still very good characters, especially the Kitson. We learn about a lot of different alien races here, and I thought, of course, Brandon Sanderson did a great job with that. He's a fantastic world builder, and he world built the crap out of these characters in this book. I really love that. And then the climax kind of takes place back on the homeworld of the first book with a big fight, and I thought it was very good. But then we go back to the space station where the rest of the book takes place, and we have sort of another sort of cliffhanger end there, which was also good. There was nothing really insulting about this book. It just didn't reach the highs of the first book, mainly due to the characters, in my opinion. And then after that, I read the 3 Skyward novellas packaged together in Skyward Flight, the first of which is called Sunreach. And the main character of that is FM, one of the main members of the Skyward Flight crew. And she's actually, I think, my favorite point of view character of the 3 point of view characters we get in the novellas. So I really enjoyed that. But this is definitely the weakest of the novellas. It's still very good. I gave it 3.5 stars. In here, we learn lore about the snails, who become very important. So I do think this is a book you shouldn't skip because you kind of need the lore about the snails. So I do think all 3 of these novellas should be read, including this one, even though it is the weakest. And then it culminates in a rescue mission, which was very good. This novella was written by Janci Patterson with Brandon Sanderson's notes. So the style of writing is a little bit different. I think it's still very accessible, but it is definitely, she's a bit more long-winded than Brandon is in terms of writing, in terms of descriptions and things like that. So you are going to notice a difference definitely in the prose. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but it is definitely different. Where she is a much better writer than Brandon is with the romance. There's a romance in this book between FM and another character, and I thought that was very charming, very good, very sweet. I gave this 3.5 stars. Thought it was very good. And then the next novella is called ReDawn. Again, this is also written by Janci Patterson. And this one explores the alien character that we meet in the beginning of the second book in the series. And she finally wakes up from her coma, and we get her. And of course, she wants to go back to her home world. But the humans in Skyward Flight want to ally with the people of our home world to fight the evil Krell and Empire that is in space. And of course, that culminates in a giant battle on this new planet. There's some great world building, and this book has one of my favorite cliffhangers that I read so far this year. So yeah, I really like this one. This one was great. I thought the characterization here was great. I thought the world building was great. We get a lot more of the Skyward Flight crew, who I think are just excellent characters. And I thought the new alien character, while she is the weakest of the 3 point of view characters in the novellas, I still thought she was a very good character and a great addition to the cast. And yeah, it also had its fair share of humor with like this romance that kinda was the male counterpart didn't know was happening, which was very funny. So yeah, I give this one 4 stars. Great novella. And then the Skyward Flight collection closes with the last novella, Evershore, which stars Jorgen, who was arguably the second most important character in the series, and Of course, he goes to the home planet of the Kitsen in this one to look for allies, and the Kitsen are awesome. They were introduced in the second book in the series. Definitely the best alien race in the series, in my opinion. They're hilarious. They talk in poetry. Uh, the way they speak is just so visually pleasing, but also like very humorous. And they're also like warriors, and they also know the magic of the series, which they teach Jorgen, and we get to see how his magic is different from Spence's, which is very interesting. And of course, it culminates in a big battle again, and the battle and the action in this book are written really well. So yeah, and it sets up the third book in the main series, actually the fourth book in the main series, in a really fantastic way. And then that leads me to the third book in the actual series, Cytonic, which is written by Brandon Sanderson in its entirety. There's no Janci Patterson writing in this book. I think this is the weakest book in the series, including the novellas. I gave this 3 stars. Once again, we're introduced to an entirely new cast that is separate from the cast in book 2 and book 1, and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. Spencer is trapped in this like alternate dimension that she has to get out of. And yeah, I just didn't like the cast of characters that surrounded her. I thought they were very, very weak. And then Spencer goes through this dilemma where it's like, does she want to actually stay in this alternate dimension and not go fight the battle in the real dimension? And I thought the decision was so silly because like Spencer's like this warrior in books 1 and 2, and all she wants to do is fight and free people and become like her dad. And I just thought it was like a sudden shift in character that didn't really make a lot of sense and was very underexplained. So, I in particular did not love that, but I did love the end of this book. I thought Mbot in particular was a star in this novel. Uh, really shined, and it set up book 4 really, really well. So I still gave it 3 stars. I still think it's a good book, but it's definitely the weakest book in the series for me. And then I closed out the series with Defiant, which is the last book in the series. I thought this was a great end to the series, 4 stars. I loved almost everything about this book. I thought the fighting was good. Obviously, Skyward Flight crew is back together, and they just play off each other really well. So the characterization here is great. I thought our antagonist was like very, very top notch. I thought the answers we get to some of the mysteries surrounding the series really worked. And I thought the end delivered on not only what it promised, but setting up like future books if somebody wanted to write them. And they are being written. I'm very happy about that. I will say if there's one small negative, it's that, and it's not even really a negative, it's Brandon Sanderson does the prisoner arc again, this time with our main character Spencer being captured and imprisoned. And he does that a lot. He does it in the Stormlight Archive. He does it in Mistborn, Hero of Ages. He does it in this book, obviously. It's just a trope that he goes for. He does it in Trust of the Emerald Sea. It's just a trope that he goes for a lot. And he writes it really well, so I don't blame him for writing it fairly often. But in terms of originality, it wasn't very original. So it's just like a small negative in an otherwise like a great book, because I do think the arc still really works. But if you've read other Sanderson books, you're going to know this arc already. Okay, and then after that, I read The School Between Winter and Fairyland by Heather Fawcett. This is one of her middle grade novels. I thought this was great. Easy 4 stars for me. I do, however, believe it is the weakest of her middle grade novels, but that just shows the strength of a writer she is, because it's still great. If you like magic, if you like magic schools, if you like elves and fae, this book is going to work for you. It's very atmospheric, this magical woods, but you also have the magical school element that kind of reminds me of Harry Potter, but not really at the same time. It's also still got like Howl's Moving Castle influences, which she clearly loves Howl's Moving Castle because she has multiple books that she's written that takes elements from that series and puts it in other books. So yeah, that really works here. It has another great side character in the Boggart. She always has a side character that's like very, very memorable in her books, and the Boggart is here. The Boggart is awesome, just an awesome, awesome character. And the end is like very emotional and sad, but also hopeful at the same time, which really works. Of course, this book's about the mystery of the school and this dragon that is about to, kill everybody according to the prophecy. But we also have our prophetic hero who is supposed to be able to defeat the dragon. But he's also just like not a very good magician, really. He is, but he's very weak to dragons. So the prophecy doesn't really make any sense. And they have to figure out why that is so. And the mysteries here are quite deep, and they are bigger than they appear on the surface. Okay, then after that, I read two novellas in Arcanum Unbound, which is Brandon Sanderson's collection of Cosmere works. The first being Mistborn Secret History. Of course, this is written by Brandon Sanderson. I gave this 3.5 stars. I actually really enjoyed everything about this novella, pretty much. I thought the scenes in it were great. And this novella is about Kelsier after he dies in book 1, as he follows the events of the next 2 books in the series in the cognitive realm. And he's trying to figure out how to not go to the spiritual realm, how to stay alive. And then after the events of the series, he manages to try to figure out a way to do this. And like I said, I thought all the scenes were great, and I thought the story made sense. What keeps me hesitant from giving this 4 stars or higher is I just don't like that Kelsier won't accept going to the spiritual realm, because it kind of ruins his story in the Final Empire, in my opinion, because it's a revenge story. That is his main motivation in the Final Empire. It's a revenge story for his dead wife, and after that revenge succeeds, he shouldn't be wanting to stay around because he accomplished what he wanted. And if this entire thing's supposed to be about his wife, who is also dead, he can go to the spiritual realm and join her. He chooses not to. So yeah, I don't love the premise of the story. I do think it just ruins Kelsier's story in book 1, which I love. So I didn't like that. But like I said, the story does make sense, and they do kind of explain that away in this book. And I'm satisfied with the explanation, even though I don't like it. And like I said, the scenes themselves are great. So I'm going to give this 3.5 stars. I just can't go any higher, even though the scenes themselves are better than very good. They're great. But for me, this book on its own is just very good. Okay, then the next novella I read was Edgedancer, which is a novella in the Stormlight Archive, again by Brandon Sanderson. This one focuses on Lift in the events between books 2 and 3, which is Words of Radiance and Oathbringer. And it does give you some satisfying answers, but I didn't like this book. I gave it 2 stars. I just did not enjoy my time. I didn't hate it. There were moments of fear that I certainly liked and scenes I certainly liked. I just don't think Lift is a very good character. I actually hate being in Lift's point of view. I find her to be very annoying and unpleasant to read, which is not a good thing when it's a single point of view story. It also makes me trepidatious for book 6 in the Stormlight Archive, because that book will deal with Lift's flashbacks. She's the flashback character in that book. So I am trepidatious for that book being released, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about this book. Yeah, so it being in Liv's point of view was very annoying and very great in your late read, but thankfully it was short, and it did have some moments that I really enjoyed, especially the Sleepless. I think they are very interesting characters that we don't know much about, so getting more of them here really, really worked for me. And I also really, really liked the climax with Nail. Think Nail is just a fascinating character, and the climax with him in this book really, really worked. And it was a great action scene, so I got to give it props from that. It's just everything else about this book fell flat for me. Okay, next up are 2 books I listened to. The first book is Book of Night by Holly Black. It's the first book in her duology. That's also just titled, I think, Book of Night. I liked this book. I gave it 3 stars. It was good. I can't say it was great or even very good, because really, what Holly Black does well is world building, and she does a lot of things well, but that I think is her biggest strength as a writer, is her ability to world build. So I love being back in a Holly Black world where she could just world build like crazy. Of course, this book does take place in our world, so there wasn't as much world building as she could do atmospherically, but she could world build the crap out of the magic, and that she does, and it's fantastic. I just wish it was like a secondary world where she could really dig her claws in and world build. But that's just one like minor problem. The other problem is this book really follows two different plots. Our main character Charlie, who is this, I don't want to use the word magician, but she does have like shadow magic. It follows her past, and her present. So we get flashbacks, and then we'll get like a present day chapter. And I just think the flashbacks were a lot more interesting than the present day stuff up until like the last 30% of the book, where the present day stuff gets really, really interesting. So there's that. But then that last 30% is like wildly, wildly good with like great action, great character work, and sort of a cliffhanger end also. Not a cliffhanger end, but like a good end that sets up the next book. It's not a cliffhanger. I used the wrong word there, but it does set up the next book in like a really, really great way. And I do think the secondary characters are somewhat interesting. Charlie's sister, very interesting character. I think Vince is an interesting character. I think the people in like the Magic Society, for the most part, are interesting. I do think this book has a very good antagonist as well. So yeah, 3 stars for me. I can't really go higher than 3 stars, but I still enjoyed my time reading it. It was good. And then the next book in the duology, the second book in the duology, I also listened to right after that, Book of Thieves. But it's also again by Holly Black. And I also gave this one 3 stars. I do think I enjoyed the first book just like a tiny, tiny bit more. But I love the way this book ended. The way this book ended and wrapped up the series was perfect. I loved all the answers we got about the magic, because there's a lot of mystery about the magic in this book, in the series, and this book answers those mysteries in like a really, really fantastic way. But where I struggled just a tiny, tiny bit with the series, with this book, not the series, this book, is that the secondary character Vince in the first book is not in this book. We had another character called Red, and he's just not as interesting as Vince. And I won't say why, because that would be a spoiler, but you'll see. And I kept waiting for Vince to appear in this book. I kind of missed that secondary character just a little bit. But other than that, this book was phenomenal. Okay, then after that was The Heroes by Joe Abercrombie. This is the second book in his standalones in the First Law universe. But you do have to read the standalones after you read the original trilogy. I mean, you can read them without reading the original trilogy, but you're going to definitely miss things, and some things aren't really going to make a whole lot of sense. I didn't really like this book that much. I gave it 2 stars. I can't give it 1 star because I acknowledge that it's written really, really well. It's like an objectively good book, and this is a lot of people's favorite standalone, and I don't blame them because it's one giant battle. The whole story is about this battle in the North between the Union and the North. So that's the whole book. All 500 pages of this book is that battle. So if you love great action, you're going to love this. But I prefer other things than action when reading fantasy. I do like action, but I don't want the whole book to be action. But that's not even really where my problem is, because there's still a lot of character moments here, and a lot of personality. So it's not all action. But my problem is, I just don't find the North to be a very engaging setting, and I don't find the characters from the North to be very engaging reads for me. And this book takes place entirely in the North, and there's just a lot of North characters here, and they're all about fighting and action, and they're sort of warriors, and that's their entire mindset, and they seem very one-note to me, and I just don't enjoy them as characters very much at all. Now, I did enjoy Calder's arc in this book, so anytime I was in Calder's point of view, I was really enjoying that. Unfortunately, there's a lot of point of view characters in this book, so you don't get as much Calder as you would think you would get, but you do get a fair amount of that, and I did enjoy his parts a lot. I also think Renfrey, I think her name is, had like some okay parts in this book that were somewhat enjoyable. But then every other point of view character I just didn't care about, like at all. And this book dragged for me just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit. So yeah, overall, it gets 2 stars for me, and 2-star in my rating system means I just didn't enjoy the book. But then we moved on to Red Country, which is the 3rd standalone in the First Law universe, again by Joe Abercrombie. I thought this book was great, 4 stars, easy for me. It surprised me. It's probably the most surprising read of the year I've had so far, just because it really is kind of a Western fantasy, and I don't generally like Westerns. So the fact that I enjoyed this was quite surprising. Now this book opens up, and you think it's going to be another revenge story based on how like the first chapter sort of ends, but it's really not. It's more of a rescue story, which was good because we didn't need another revenge story in this book. Last Argument of Kings, the entire first trilogy was kind of a revenge story for Pharaoh, and then Best Served Cold, which is the first standalone, is a revenge story. So I'm happy this wasn't quite a revenge story. I also just really thought the atmosphere of this book worked, and some of the surprise character appearances from previous novels in this book also really, really worked. I thought this book had great action scenes. It had like 5 different points where the book could have ended, like 5 different climaxes almost, and every one of them hit. From the duel in Crease to the dragon rescue to the imprisonment of the rebel to the rebel sort of from our main character Shy trying to free the rebel to like the very end with the Casca coming back to the town to confront them and get back gold. I thought all 5 of them, they could have ended the book at the end of any one of those 5 scenes, but somehow there was all 5 of them in the book, and they all really, really, really worked. So yeah, I love that. I thought our main character Shy was just like a very interesting character. I thought our secondary main character Temple was also a very interesting character. They weren't these like rugged warriors who were just concerned with action. And they were also just less morally gray than Joe normally writes. They were very hopeful and easy to root for characters. Yeah, there wasn't a lot about this book that I hated. And I thought it ended in like a really, really great way, sort of like a fake out ending. But it really, really worked. Great book. It doesn't reach the highs that like Best Served Cold or The Last Argument of Kings hit, but for me, it's like right up there with Before They Were Hanged in the 4-star great range. Okay, and then I listened to the book Gallant by V.E. Schwab. This is sort of a gothic, almost fairy tale in a way, I would call it. It definitely reads a bit young adult, so there's that. If you don't like young adult, you're not going to like this. But I do like young adult, and I did love this. I gave it 4 stars. I think it's great. But the magic here was very, very interesting. It kind of reminds me of Shades of Magic, where there's sort of these parallel worlds that mirror each other in this house that's called the Gallant, and the keepers of the house have to make sure the door is sealed so basically the incarnation of the devil, or not the devil, the incarnation of death or the Grim Reaper can't get through. But he's terrorizing the minds of the keepers of the house. And of course, we have this orphan girl who finds out she's actually a member of the house, and she goes to live with them from the orphanage. And she tries to help them as the mysteries unfold. And I think the end is, has that V. Schwab flair to it, where it's quite tragic, but also hopeful at the same time. Her ends are always a mixed bag for me if I like them or don't like them. I really like the end of this one, though. So yeah, this book was great. 4 stars. Okay, and then I read the first book in the Dark Tower series, The Gunslinger by Stephen King. This is my least favorite book of the year so far. I gave this 1 star. I hated it. Yeah, I just hated everything about it. The story in the present tense, the story that was taking place in present day, where Roland was just so weird. It felt like an acid trip. I didn't understand anything that was happening. Nothing made a lot of sense at all. And then the flashback chapters about how Roland became a gunslinger, they were interesting, but they went on way too long. And this book's short, so that's surprising. Yeah, just didn't like anything about this, like at all. The end, I guess, was somewhat admirable and leaves hope that maybe I'll like the second book, but I don't know if I'm going to read the second book. I don't know, and that's a shame because this was a priority read for me going into this year, the Dark Tower series. But after this book, I am hesitant to continue it. Okay, and then I listened to Yumi and the Nightmare Painter by Brandon Sanderson. It's one of the standalones in the Cosmere, I think it's Secret Project number 2 or 3. I'm not exactly sure about that. I know it's not 4 though. And this is sort of his answer to Romantasy, in my opinion, and I loved it. It was very good. 3.5 stars. It doesn't peak as high as some of the other Brandon Sanderson books, and it's definitely a tale of 2 halves, where the first half is kind of just meh. It's okay, but then the second half is great. And this book had a twist for me where I didn't see coming, which is pretty rare for Brandon Sanderson. Usually his twists are fairly obvious or heavy-handed. And in this case, I don't think it was. And perhaps I missed it because I don't usually listen to his books on audiobook, and it's easier for me to miss stuff that way. But yeah, the twist was still great. I loved it. So I'm not complaining that I didn't pick up on it. I actually really enjoyed that I didn't pick up on it and was able to be surprised. I do think both characters, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, are like really great characters, and they have some really good chemistry, and their chapters read very different from each other, which is good because you do want them to read differently from each other because you want them to feel like different people, and they do. I was worried that this book was going to have the time travel elements into it because it's sort of hinted throughout the book that it might. I'm glad that wasn't the case. Yeah, it's very good. Like I said, it doesn't peak as high as some other Brandon Sanderson books, and it is definitely a tale of 2 halves, but overall, between the magic and the world building and the characterization and the highs of the second half, I am going to give this 3.5 stars. It's very good. Okay, and then I read the Sacred Hunt duology by Michelle West, which was published in the mid 90s, I think 94, 95, or 95, 96. And it's part of a larger series, but this is just a self-contained duology that takes place before the larger series begins, like hundreds of years before the larger series begins. And the first book in that series is called Hunter's Oath. And this book was good. I gave it 3 stars. Now, here's the thing with fantasy books from the 90s. This is when fantasy started to become more modernized, and you can find books that read very modern with like modern language and modern pacing in the 90s. Like, for example, A Song of Ice and Fire by George R. R. Martin. That reads very much like a modern fantasy. And Harry Potter, of course, was written in the 90s. The first 3 books reads very much like a modern fantasy. And then there's other examples, of course. But there are also examples of books that read like classic fantasy in the 90s. And this would be one of those cases. This reads very, very much like a classic fantasy, both for the good and the bad. And the bad of that would be that it's very bloated, and the descriptions are very much elongated and where they don't need to be. So yeah, these books, they just take forever to read, which is a bit of a problem. But other than that, I really enjoyed the first book in this series. I think like all 3 characters, Gilliam, Stephen, and the like wizard that the sorceress that travels time, were very, 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 very intriguing characters. Her name's Ivey, by the way. And I loved the world building that Michelle does in this book. Michelle West is just a fantastic world builder. There's so much great world building in here. It's almost Tolkien-like with like the gods and like sort of the mythology she puts into these books, especially these 2. I haven't read any other books by her, but the mythology in here is like so deep, and you could tell it's really well thought out in advance. It's almost like she wrote her own legendarium. So yeah, I really appreciated that, but I also just appreciated some of the scenes in this book and the hunt itself, and then the climax. I thought was really, really good. And yeah, this whole story takes place about this sacred hunt that has to take place every year to feed the kingdom. But once a year, all the hunters have to go and be hunted by the hunter god. So yeah, that's sort of the main overview of the story. But there's so much more there, and there's also these like dark lords that are trying to come back and things like that. And very, very interesting. This book was good. 3 stars. Like I said, it did feel like a bit of a chore to read at times, though. But then we get The Hunter's Death, which is the closing book in the duology, again by Michelle West. This book got 2 stars for me. I wanted to like it a lot more than I liked it. Unfortunately, like I said, Michelle West, it's written very much in like old school fantasy, and this book is just so bloated. This book almost put me in a reading slump. It took me 7 days to finish it. It never takes me 7 days to finish a book. Man, was this a rough read for me. And part of the reason for that is she shoves a whole nother plot into this book that's separate from book 1. And it's like the House War plot. And that whole plot could have basically been cut out, or definitely just like marginalized and skimmed. And nothing in this book would really change. And I just don't know why it was necessary to shove that in here. This book is just so long. It's almost 700 pages with like some small font. And like I said, it's not just, there's not a lot of plot moving going on in this book. It's a lot of description, a lot of like older prose, and it did feel like a bit of a chore to read. Now, I don't give it 1 star because the stuff with Stephen, Gilliam, and Ivey still was awesome, still ruled. I really loved those chapters that they were in when the plot was actually moving, and it ends exactly the way it should have ended. Like, I couldn't imagine the duology ending better than it ended. It ended in such an emotional way, but the right. So yeah, I know I crap talked this book in the beginning, but I do have to say this book does have a lot of positives, and I do want to read more Michelle West. But probably a few months from now, I need a break. I can't read classic fantasy after classic fantasy without, putting some modern fantasy in between it. And then I read a standalone, another Eowyn Ivey book. Snow Child from last year was one of my favorite books I read last year. I gave that 5 stars. This year I read Blackwood's Blue Sky, which is another one of her atmospheric sort of magical realism books taking place in Alaska. I did not like this one as much as I liked The Snow Child. That being said, it was still very good. 3.5 stars. Again, she just nails atmosphere like no other author almost. Like there's a few that I think does atmosphere and setting as well as her, like Rachel Gillig, for example. But she nails it as well as anybody I ever seen nail it. And she does her research. She's actually only published 3 books in her career. And that career has spanned over 16 years now, I think. So it's like she takes a while to write these books because she does a lot of research before she writes them. And that research pays off here. Now, this book actually has more tangible magic than The Snow Child, but yet it feels like less of a fantasy. So, like, The Snow Child is definitely magical realism, but it also feels very much like a fairy tale and fantasy. This book doesn't really feel like a fairy tale at all. It definitely just feels like a straight magical realism book throughout it. And I'll give you a brief overview of the plot. It's about this mom and daughter who move out of this lodge in Alaska to move in with this man called Arthur, who lives like way out in the woods. And there's a secret about this man that I'm not going to spoil, but it's a very big secret, and it's why the magic in this book feels very real, because you learn it like pretty instantly. And it's about life out in the wilderness with him. And there's tragedy and joy, and there's light moments and dark moments, and the end just made me cry. Like, again, Eowyn Ivey writes great ends to her books, and this is no exception. So yeah, I really did enjoy the end, but I did definitely miss that like fairy tale-esque feel that The Snow Child had. And that brings me to my last book of the month, This Is How You Lose the Time War, by Amal El-Mohtar. I probably said that name wrong and I apologize. And Max Gladstone. So it's written by 2 authors, and this story is very interesting. It's a sci-fi novella, but it's written almost entirely through letters. So one author writes letters for red, and another author writes the letters for blue. And it sort of has that feel that, like, say, Dracula has, where the entire story is written in journals and letters and newspaper clippings, or the Emily Wilde series, where the entire series is written in journal form. So it has that sort of feel to it. And this story is about 2 generals on opposing sides of a war who slowly fall in love with each other. And what does that mean? And the theming is like soldiers generally have more in common with each other than they would realize, right? It's like it's the general, it's like the people in charge of the war that started the war that really don't have anything in common, but the soldiers, they do. And it has moments of tragedy and moments of brevity in it. I will say I do think the first 40-ish% of this book is a hard read for me, just mainly because I'm not really a big sci-fi reader, and the sci-fi parts of this book I just wasn't into. I really love the letters and how they like fell in love with each other. I thought that was like really, really well done. I really enjoyed reading that stuff, but the sci-fi parts I just didn't care about. And the first half of this book, where they're like taunting each other through these letters and talking about all the sci-fi, I was just like, I don't care that much about this. But the letters became increasingly more interesting as the book went on, and I gave this a solid 3.5 stars. I think it's a very good read. Okay, and that is all 20 books I read in March. The good, the bad, the ugly. There were a few great books in there. I'm happy I read it. My book of the month would be Red Country, by the way. I don't know if I said that while I was reading it, but Red Country was great. Of course, let me know down below if you read any of these books, if you agree or disagree, or if you want to read any of these books. And let me know what you read too. I'm interested in hearing it all. I love hearing what everybody's reading as a big reader myself. And I just want to make a couple announcements about the future of this channel, about the future videos coming out on this channel. I do plan on doing a top 10 sci-fi list of the top 10 sci-fis that I have read. I have not read that many sci-fis, so it's going to be a very basic list. I plan on that video coming out sometime in the beginning of May. There's a few books I want to read this month before I lock anything in. I also want to do a quarterly review. So the first quarter of 2026 is up, so I'm going to do my favorite reads from the first quarter in 2026. That should come out next week. That'll be a very fun video to film. And if I do read the Age of Madness trilogy by Joe Abercrombie, I'm going to do a First Law tier list sometime this month as well. So those are 3 videos in the pipeline for sure that should be coming out in the next month. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.